Alright, like most pivotal experiences in my life, my story begins when I answered a Craigslist ad. Said ad said, "We look teacher, grades 6 to 12, please write and say what you may teach." Now, based on the diction of the ad, I thought there was a 95% chance that it was written in an internet cafe in Nigeria, and they were looking to harvest my information, but I needed a job. And so I sent my cover letter and resume, and I was surprised when a couple hours later I received a call inviting me to come in for an interview at a school in South Brooklyn. The next day when I got off the train, I went to the street of the interview and I looked around and I didn't see anything that looked remotely like a school. So I walked a little bit farther and eventually I came upon what looked to be an abandoned storefront, but had a sign that said it was a school. And I said, all right, I guess this is a school. So for some reason I still entered. And I had to walk over boxes to get into the main office because everything was in total disarray. So then I started panicking. Like, why did I answer this Craigslist ad? Where am I? But then, like a beacon, I saw on the wall a picture of students in some kind of dance costume. And in the center of the photograph was Hillary Clinton. And I thought, well, if Hillary Clinton's in this photograph, it can't be that sketchy, right? And then the principal came to get me for my interview, and he had a very thick accent, but I couldn't tell. I'm a Spanish teacher, and I wasn't familiar with his accent. And I quickly discerned his interview style. He asked me a question, he gave me about 3 seconds to start answering it, and then he interrupted me to say what he would say if he had been asked a question. And it seemed to go really well because when he finished the conversation, he pushed print on his computer and handed me a contract. And even though I was going to be working with children, he didn't ask me for any references or a diploma or background check or anything, but I knew I wasn't a criminal, so I signed it. I came up the next week for teacher orientation, and the first thing I noticed when I entered the auditorium was that there was an American flag in the front and a Turkish flag next to it. I thought, oh, that explains his accent. The second thing I noticed was that most of the women were dressed really modestly. Their hair was covered, everything was covered except for their hands and their face. And I started to feel really self-conscious. And so I tried to, without anyone noticing, I tried to unzip my skirt a little bit and pull it down so I was a little bit more modest. And the next thing I noticed, the orientation started, and I saw a huge box of donuts. And I wanted one so badly. But I didn't want to be the first person to take one, and so I looked around waiting for someone to take one, and it never happened for 3 hours. It was terrible. And a couple days later, I realized it was because it was Ramadan, and everybody was fasting. And a couple weeks after that was when I finally realized that I had intertwined my life forever with a very conservative Turkish religious group. Now, most of the students came from Turkey and lived in dorms, and most of the teachers also came from Turkey, but there were some Americans too, and we had to figure out how to work with each other culturally, because there were some differences. And one thing, it was a private school, it wasn't a religious school, but God was part of almost everything that happened in the school. And one day, I went into the teacher's lounge to make some copies, and one of my coworkers was there. And I said, hey, how's it going? And he said, terrible, Miss Wagner. Life is suck. And I just ignored the usage of that. And I said, I'm sorry, but don't you have a class right now? And he said, yes. And I said, well, who's watching your class? And he just smiled, and he pointed to the heavens, very confident that his class was in good hands. And after I started working there, I learned as much as I could about Turkey, about their specific religious group, their beliefs, and I got to the point where I could go to any store and figure out what was halal and what wasn't halal. I knew what meat to buy for our taco parties in Spanish class. And I think I started assimilating a little bit too well, because one day I was washing my hands in the bathroom, and a ninth grader shyly approached me and said, Miss Wagner, I need you to repeat something for me in Arabic. And she said something in Arabic. I said, I'm not repeating that, because I just had these visions of teacher saying F-word in YouTube remix or something, and I was like, no, I can't do that. And she said, please, it's really important, and she repeated it again. And another girl came out of the stall, and she said, stop! You can't convert Miss Wagner to Islam in the school bathroom. And she meant well. I really think her heart was in the right place, but she was saying between the genders. Like, the men wouldn't call women by the first name. I even had a coworker who wouldn't talk to a male store clerk. She would just leave if that was the only option. And so we had parties for the school, but the women would be in one room, the men would be in the other room. And so the principal didn't even look me in the eyes. So it made some of the interviews or some of our conversations a little bit difficult. Now you might wonder, under these circumstances, how they get married. And it was actually really interesting. Within their religious network, they have a lot of matchmakers, and the women make resumes. Not all of them, but a lot of them would make resumes, dating resumes with all of their attributes, their finest qualities, and send them to suitors. And if the suitors like that, they'd start a relationship on GChat or Facebook chat. And then sometimes they dated traditionally, it just depended on the couple. But the one important thing was that they couldn't touch. And so until they got married, they couldn't hold hands, they couldn't kiss in this particular group. And that proved to be my cultural undoing. As much as I tried to learn everything, it just wasn't enough. One day I went to my 10th grade class, and they had math at the time when I was waiting outside, and they had a teacher named Mr. C. Mr. C was especially socially awkward just because he hadn't had a lot of experience with different people, and he had no classroom management skills. Every time he walked past his class, there was screaming, there was crashing. Okay, sorry. There's crashes, things were thrown out. And I was waiting outside and one of the kids said, Miss Wagner, come save us. Mr. G is going to kill us all. And I said, I just thought it was a joke. And I said, is this true? And he said, yes. Every single one of them. They are so annoying. And without thinking, it just slipped out. I raised my hand and I said, give me 5, Mr. G. And unfortunately, he'd never touched a woman before in his life. And I put him in a terrible position deciding if he wanted to go with that part of his religion or the part of his religion that emphasized kindness. And so we sat there for a minute in a stalemate. The students were watching their mouths agape, and I wish I could take my hand down, but it was just too late. And then what he did was what I thought was a pretty ingenious cultural compromise. He raised his hand, and instead of really giving me a high five, he went like this.